This is the Convene podcast. My name is Maggie, digital media editor. This episode is brought to you by Visit Phoenix. Welcome all to another talk on Convening Leaders 2025. Casey, what's our focus today?
Thanks, Maggie. I'm excited to hear Amal Clooney speak at Convening Leaders. She will serve as the closing main stage speaker at CL25 in a session called Leveraging Your Platform to Combat Social Injustice. And she'll be discussing ways in which individuals and organizations can be catalysts for positive change. It's something that Amal has definitely modeled in her own career. A lot of us who follow pop culture probably know her as George Clooney's wife, but long before him, she was a very accomplished international law and human rights lawyer and still practices. She's worked on high-profile cases regarding mass atrocities, including representing victims of genocide in places like Sudan and Armenia. And in an interview in Time in 2022, when she was named one of the Women of the Year, she said that her career is really guided by what she's outraged about and what she thinks she can really try to influence with a goal of trying to improve the system one case at a time. And I think that's a great lesson for planners to hear at CL. You know, there are a lot of issues in the world that planners face, but I think the idea of kind of tackling one issue at a time to try to make positive change is a great message. So I'm excited to hear what she has to say. What about you guys?
You know what struck me when I was thinking about our audience and Amal Clooney's work with the foundation is the educational impact. The foundation trains people at all levels. In addition to like the cases that they take on, they also support early career lawyers in sub-Saharan Africa, and in most cases, young women lawyers. They give scholarships to women to go to law school. But they start much earlier than that. They've opened schools in Lebanon for refugees. And I thought this is something that could have the biggest impact of all. They train lay people to go, and not always lay people, but you don't have to be a lawyer, to just go to trials of interest and monitor them. If there's any reason to think there was discrimination or abuses, then they're able to let the foundation know. And it just strikes me that this is very similar to an association that has training at all levels, that supports young learners, that supports like university students to early career, and then helps people kind of just amplify their influence. So in addition to just the court cases that they've won and the way that they are, zeroing in on human rights abuses, just the fact that they are able then to just leverage and amplify their influence at all levels. I thought that was really a great strategy. Yeah, Michelle, what do you think?
I'm interested in seeing how she connects her work to the work of events, because we talk about events as being drivers for economic and social progress. So I'm hoping that she's able to connect that with the work that event organizers do, because I feel like in Convene, we often try to remind event organizers of the important work they do, and it serves a larger purpose, because just like we start looking, kind of navel gazing and doing the work that we do, we forget the larger impact it can have. So I also love that the Clooney Foundation supports journalists who are wrongly accused or are victims of human rights violations, or reporting on that, and they're somehow being discriminated against. So not that the work we do is equal to that, but still similar enough. They write, we write. Similar. Curt?
Continuing the thought on the journalists, one thing I thought was interesting was that she has talked about how often the journalists that she represents, or that the organization represents, no, but the lawyers don't even meet them, before the case happens, because they're in jail and they're not allowed to see them. And so they know their families, maybe they meet their families, maybe, but they don't even get to consult with their client at all. And it's an unusual way of working. But what I was actually going to talk about until you mentioned the journalists was I listened to she was sat down for an interview on stage at the SAP convention. It's an HR convention. And apparently that was like a week before the election. And one of the things that struck me was her early career, how she started out as a corporate lawyer in New York. And, she was doing a lot of interesting work. But the first big case she ended up working on was Enron back in the day, and which is a huge case, right? And then she was like really interested in the pro bono work, but something led her to one of those cases led her to The Hague for whatever reason. And that's when she was offered this other, to do this other work at The Hague. And that's where the World Court, is that what that's called? The World Court in The Hague. And she got offered this other job, and she had to tell her parents, I'll be making 10% of what I was making in corporate law. And she said she was doing really well, and her parents just didn't understand for the longest time. But she said she sort of had to follow her heart and her sense of, doing something right, or making something right, which I thought was very interesting. And I thought it was also interesting because it's a huge risk, at a time when people maybe aren't necessarily happy in their careers, or they're having to change their careers. I mean, this is an interesting thing to talk about, for any group, at any event, because, the way things are happening in the world, it's pretty turbulent in a lot of industries right now, and things change. But the other thing that I thought was interesting, we've talked about failures before, and how failures are just a way are sometimes a good thing, because it can teach you something or help advance your thought processes and that kind of thing. She, in this event, talked about if they haven't failed, I think maybe they're not setting their ambitions high enough. Most of the things that are worthwhile are kind of difficult to do, and you're going to fall flat on your face sometimes, which I thought, it's pretty true, pretty interesting. Yeah. So Barbara?
I was just going to say that I know this sounds like kind of a corny tagline, but her life just speaks to that power of purpose. Like she's got everything that I think she's so glamorous and beautiful, and homes all over the world. I mean, any kind of vacation or experience, I think, is at her fingertips. And so the fact that she is devoting her life to this, just to fighting for the rights of others, just really speaks to how that can animate your life, and the value of that, not just for others, but also for, being worth your time, and more than those kind of surface things that people, including myself, sometimes think are the pinnacle.
I'm so curious to hear. I hope she talks a little bit about, I was kind of reading over, a little synopsis of her session. And I hope that she talks about what she's been involved with lately. I think people are so curious about a public person like her, and like what she does, and like you were saying, Barbara. And like what you were saying, Michelle, like how she'll relate it back to our industry. I think I was reading a little bit about her earlier this year. She was part of a panel back, I think, a year ago, last January, that convened to review for the International Criminal Court arrest warrants for the Hamas leaders and Israeli leaders. And she's of Lebanese descent. And I thought that was interesting because it sounds like she's come under some criticism. Some people think she has not spoken up enough about that. And I'm curious to know if she'll talk about that a little bit. One of the things that, she's supposed to talk about is how businesses can transform their platforms to drive positive change and support the fight against injustice. Be curious to know if she talks about in difficult situations like that where, that's such a polarizing topic. And I'm curious to know if she'll speak to that a little bit, because I think a lot of organizations, people, businesses are kind of caught between, do we stand up, how far do we go when we stand up for something, and do we say anything? And I'm curious to know if she's going to share about that.
Well, I think actually she would be a great wrap-up of the event, because she'll bring a lot of the experiences from what will happen the previous days at Convening Leaders to a close. So there is a session, for example, Ask a Lawyer about AI. So there you go. She is a lawyer and she has this bigger picture. And then we have Kishore Mahbubani, who speak about, again, a very broad topic about the world and macroeconomics and so forth. And she might bring a little bit of this perspective. And I think she also touches a bit on Brené Brown, with the person that she is, with following her heart, what Curt said, and being brave and not being afraid of failure. And I feel that that's what Brené Brown will touch on, about courage and trying to live life as your heart desires, right? So staying true to yourself. And it will be interesting to see how all these things we'll hear in the previous days would just melt into her session. So I don't know much about her. I mean, I'm not following pop culture that much. I know about her husband, and that's it. I'm curious to learn more about her and the person that she is, and she sounds like a very, very inspiring woman. So, yeah. Curt?
Yeah, that thing about taking risks in your life and changing things up and that kind of stuff has, in the last year, become very interesting to me. And I used to think of those kind of speakers as sort of a waste. And I don't, because I wasn't actually in that place. And now I'm sort of all about it and finding out more about it and tactics and what they've done and how they did it and all that kind of stuff. So that'll be interesting to hear her.
Anyone else want to add anything? We're all just too excited to make it to CL and dig into all that education that's waiting for us there. It will be very interesting. So, thank you all. We want to thank our sponsor, Visit Phoenix. To learn more about them and the intriguing tagline, "The desert made us do it," go to visitphoenix.com/meetings. As usual, you'll find all the links in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, do give us a 5-star review and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For more industry insights, visit pcma.org/convene. Stay inspired, keep inspiring, and until next time.